All right. So I'm going to, I know some of you can see me. I assume all of you can, but I'm going to pin the video onto me. Uh, Spotlight. Okay, so here I am. So I can see me, which is also really important because I like to see me. So if you're wondering what is behind me or what is my background today, I always like to have some special background that either relates to the topic of the session or just inspirational. And this is both. This is a medieval synagogue from Poland. It isn't the actual synagogue, but a reproduction of it. It was put together by the Polin. Polin means Poland in Hebrew, but also is a pun of the words "here we will reside," and that's Jews had many centuries of safe residence in Poland and thriving in Poland, especially even immediately before the Holocaust in the 20s, for instance. There was a thriving Jewish life there. But in the century or two before that, in the 1800s, throughout the Polish countryside, you see these gorgeous synagogues springing up. And this is one of them. Of course, Poland's borders were changing all the time. Poland, Ukraine, Russia, it's all sort of one mishmash, as it is sort of today. But anyway, this is a reproduction of a synagogue at the beautiful Pauline Museum in Warsaw, which I highly recommend. So I took this picture when I was there in 2017, and that'll be our background because I think it really focuses our attention on one of the major themes of Eban's series. And one of the major themes I want to get across, which is the thriving nature of Jewish life, of Jewish culture in the diaspora, and the contribution of the diaspora to the Jewish people and to civilization as a whole. And that's something that even though Abba Eban, who of course created this series, even though Eban was a ardent Zionist member of the Israeli government, spokesperson for Israel, he understood, and we're going to see how he understood that importance and how he ended the series. Since it's our last event, our last session, we're going to show the ending of the series, not once, but twice. We're going to show, sorry if you can all mute yourselves. I'm going to mute you. And whenever you want to speak, it's fine. We can be informal. We don't have a huge crowd here, so we could do that. But if you have a question, raise your hand, or better yet, put it into the chat, and I'll make sure to cover them. So, all right. So some questions I want to consider this evening. One, Jews have been around for 3 millennia. That basically, maybe we can say 3,500 years, 4,000, but who's going to quibble? Let's just say, 3 millennia. And so it evenly divides itself into 1,000, 2,000, and 3,000. These are not Bibi Netanyahu's court cases, by the way, that they also have that label. But the first 1,000 years of Jewish history, the second 1,000, the third 1,000, what are the greatest contributions or advancements to civilization that the Jews brought to each of these 3,000-year units, these 3 millennia? That's one question I want to consider. Second is I want to just go back to anti-Semitism because I touched upon it, but in covering ancient times, which is really what I did in the first two sessions, more or less, there's a lot to say and a lot that Abba even does say in this series. And, with the added question, because I want to bring this up to date, 2025, is it worse now than ever? And you can, of course, like any good Jewish answer, say yes and no. Say it's the same as it's always been, but you also could say there are things that have been added over the centuries. And Eban gets into this through the series. It started out as one thing, and then it added on something else. It never lost what it originally was, but it kept getting bigger and bigger. And of course, it never was bigger than it was in this past century. So, anti-Semitism, and then a look to the future. What will the future bring? Where are we right now? I mean, Franklin Foer wrote an article in the Atlantic a year ago saying that the American golden era, the golden age of American Judaism, has ended. And he dated the ending, I believe, to October 7th. We can make claims here or there that certainly things have changed dramatically since October 7th. Maybe throw in COVID as well. But I'm not so sure that even if it's not quite the same as it used to be, I'm not so sure that the golden era is over or that it was ever so golden in the first place. So we could bring that question to bear. So the three things I want to deal with, greatest contributions in each of the 1,000 years, anti-Semitism, and where are we going? We could definitely say that things are heading downhill right now. But I think that helps us to go back to Eban and look back at history. We've been around for a long, long time. And as he travels through the ages in this 9-part series, Eban focuses on the positive, but doesn't deny the evolution of anti-Semitism. From a religious phenomenon in antiquity, which is what anti-Semitism was, it started out as that. It then takes on a more economic and social form in the Middle Ages, and then, of course, in modern times, racial and political phenomenon. And each builds, as I said, on what happened previously. So I want to discuss that a little bit as we go through. But the way I'm going to do this tonight is to quote from the episodes because, I went to journalism school. I think I'm a decent writer. This guy is one of the great orators of Jewish history. And I could say in any language, because I know Hebrew pretty well, and there have been some great speakers. Um, can't speak necessarily to the zillion other languages Jews have spoken, but in the English language, this man could write and he could speak. And so I'm going to use his words and the words of other great spokespeople to discuss how Jews have been thought of by others. So I want to go back to actually ancient times for this first quote, and it's from Josephus, Flavius Josephus, also a great writer, a known historian, very famous historian, lived in Rome most of his adult life, but also was a fighter in the Jewish revolt against Rome in 66 CE. And then eventually he went over to the Roman side because he saw there was no hope. And, we could call him a traitor, but in fact, and many have, but in fact, he made the decision that was made by the early rabbis like Yochanan ben Zakkai, that the Jewish future was not going to be a military one, that they could see the writing on the wall. And so they went over to the Roman side to help to keep Judaism going in a new form after the temple was destroyed. So his form was to write about it, write about Judaism and talk about how important Judaism is to the Roman world. And I might have mentioned last week, and it was toward the end of my notes, I'm not sure if I got to it, that 1 million Jews in Rome itself, and certainly within the Roman Empire, converted, rather, 1 million Romans converted to Judaism. It was very popular. So Josephus wrote, the masses have been for a long time filled with enthusiasm for our pious customs, and there isn't a city in Greece or a people among the barbarians who does not practice our custom of weekly rest, our fasts, our lighting of lamps, which means Hanukkah, probably, and many of our dietary laws. And thus God is known the world over. So from the Roman period, Judaism was spread into the Roman world, which, of course, if you remember the map, you know the map of the Roman Empire. It's like the whole Mediterranean and then some. Judaism went with Rome wherever Rome went and spread all over the world. And the great contributions, in biblical times, in our first session, we talked about monotheism. We talked about especially morality based on monotheism and the idea of a single God. The second period of Jewish history, we're talking about Jewish customs. and things that are based on our traditions of monotheism, but are the traditions themselves, especially the Sabbath and the dietary laws that were so prominent to ancient Judaism, circumcision as well, that were questioned by the non-Jewish world. Curiosities. They didn't have our calendar. They wondered what this was all about. They didn't have monotheism. They had, of course, idols in all their town squares, in their polis. Um, so Josephus is saying it became very popular, and facts bear that out. It was a very competitive environment. And then Abba Eban shows that, of course, that's how Judaism spread throughout the world, through that. But then when Constantine came aboard and in his dream in the fourth century saw a cross instead of a menorah, which would have been a lot better for us, Christianity became overnight the state religion of most of the civilized Western world. Anyway, and that meant that Judaism through Christianity, also the ideas of Judaism through Christianity, were spread throughout the world. So that's an important part of what we're talking about. It caused a great sense of pride among Jews, but mostly Jews at that point were beginning to separate themselves, certainly from the Christian world, because it also created competition. And Abba Eban writes or he says in episode 4, as we get to Europe, of course, the Muslim world was another matter, but also Judaism spread through Islam to all of North Africa up to Spain. Judaism, again, influencing Islam tremendously. So these contributions cannot be overstated. But Europe, Eban says, in many ways, Jews were like all the other peoples of Europe, but in one way, however, they were unique. In matters of religion, they were the only strangers. That's important to note. And then he says, in a world where every event of nature was a mystery and man's religion provided the only path of understanding, where men disagreed about religion, they disagreed about the world. So this competition between Judaism and Christianity, between Jews and their neighbors, was religion-based, because culture was religion-based. For so many centuries, there was competition along those lines. And he details it in great detail in the series, in these episodes. He points out that in the statues of medieval Christianity, Jews were often portrayed as a woman with a blindfold. When we think of that, blind justice is blind. But in their case, they're saying, no, Jews are blind because they refuse to see that Jesus is the Messiah. And across from her, Christianity was portrayed as triumphant, the noble possessor of the truth. So what's very interesting is that Jews were persecuted, most definitely, and again details it in this early Middle Age period, but also saved in a way, kept around as an example of what not to be, because there were no other examples basically around for Christians to look at. And in that way, in some strange way, Jews were saved. And also because Jews were so spread around, we served a purpose as we could help transport ideas and merchants, throughout the Roman Empire, and then later on in other ways. So that's, now we get into the Middle Ages, and I'm just really talking about anti-Semitism for the most part. This religious competition changes, it morphs as nobles, kings start to see Jews as serving a purpose. They weren't allowed to own land for the most part, so they could become sort of the money lenders and tax collectors. And of course, those weren't the most loved professions, but that's why you give it to someone who's not going to be loved anyway. Because of that, Jews were protected by the rulers for the most part, but hated by the peasantry. And it's sort of interesting. I asked this question. We sort of go back to early sessions. The second session, I believe I mentioned it. Jews were they were basically conservative. We think of Judaism as being sort of liberal, as we call it, progressive, social action, justice. And we do better in modern times when there is democracy, when there is a free government, when there isn't a consolidation of control in an autocrat's hands. That is for sure, because we've seen so many examples where it has not worked for Jews to be in places without some kind of free political system. So, but back then, it was better for Jews to have some kind of solid control by one power, usually a noble or a king, because the king would usually like to use the Jews as a foil, perhaps, as protection from their subjects. Whatever it was, yes, we're being used, but we're also being protected. And that happened with some of the great persecutions, including the time of the Crusades, the Black Death, that are mentioned in the series. So let's talk a little about that. But the church, not so nice for the most part. Recent popes have been great. Since Vatican II, things are going well. But back in the Middle Ages, not so great. So the church accused the Jews of having lost the way. And worse than that, it accused them of having caused the death of the Messiah. So that, deicide is the sort of first, the ground zero of anti-Semitism, to use an overused expression that probably shouldn't be used too much anymore. These accusations were repeated in sermons year after year, generation after generation, and these were meant primarily to keep Christians from listening to Jewish ideas, Eban says, but in the minds of the poor and uneducated, they planted the seeds of hatred. So even if the priests, the bishops, did not necessarily adhere to the belief that Jews killed their God, it served their purpose. From time immemorial, scapegoating has been the enemy of peace and among human beings. And unfortunately for the Jews, we've been we invented the word, and we've been it all too many times. So then we have the money lenders, the taxes, and all of that stuff. Then the Black Death in 1348. The Jews were affected as much as 1/3 of Europe was killed during the Black Death. Basically, it was a horrible catastrophe. It spread northward and westward. 24 million people died, and the rumor arose that Jews had poisoned the wells. Pope Clement came to the Jews' defense, called it absurd, but already this idea had sort of gotten out of control. And Jews were again made a scapegoat. And the anger was taken out on Jews. Now, there might be, and Eban brings this out, some truth to the notion that because of the laws of kashrut, Jews always washing their meat, for instance, it might have prevented the Jews from dying at such a rate as the non-Jewish population. But whether or not that was true, it certainly wasn't that Jews poisoned the wells. We also have, the blood libels starting around this time, a little earlier in England, and again, totally false. Just it's sort of the series of conspiracy theories against Jews sort of begins with all of that, and then ends up with the protocols of the elders of Zion in the 19th century and into the 20th and to today, where it says Jews control everything. I wish we did. I really do. All right. So what happened in the Middle Ages is that economics were added to the religion. So it started out as a religious thing. Jews killed, him. But it ended, at least in the Middle Ages, as an economic, a jealousy, of a rivalry, social issues. Jews were almost always separate. This is about when ghettos began to come into play, where Jews were living in separate areas, and Jews generally wanted to anyway, because of cultural differences. It's amazing how we sustained those. The diaspora really gave us the chance to affirm our cultural identity, because we had to have that in order to survive. We didn't have a land, we didn't have a place that we could be free. So we had to hold on to Shabbat. We had to hold on to kashrut. And so to do that, you sort of need to be living together because if you're only going to eat kosher food, there aren't too many other houses you're going to eat at. Still a problem for some people today. All right. But there were exceptions. So we're sort of going back and forth. Anti-Semitism. But now, what happens in Spain in the Middle Ages is astounding. 500 years of Jewish life in Spain. How long have we been here in America? Let's say 1700s. We're not going to the early, from Brazil up to the Caribbean to the New Amsterdam, but let's say 1700-ish. So we're talking, a little more than the actual age of the United States, but not much more, maybe 300, maybe 400 years, 500 years in Spain, and it ended almost overnight. Of course, Spain had an awful lot of turmoil. It was ping-ponged between Muslim and Christian rule. All of that, the conquistador, the Spanish history is actually covered by Eban, who does a good job at giving us the rest of the world while he's talking about Jewish history and how it relates. But here's what he says in episode 4. In Spain, particularly Jewish life had been imbued with a new ideal. It was the ideal of living fully and creatively within the larger society while remaining faithful to the ancient values and traditions of the Jewish people. And so, on a certain summer day in August, in the very month that Christopher Columbus embarked on his journey of discovery, the last Jewish refugees set sail from Spain. The memory of that tragic moment persists, but even in that moment of despair, there were seeds of hope. For they carried with them a legacy of faith that would sustain the Jews of Spain and all of Europe and other lands in new worlds yet to be discovered. I told you he's a great writer. What he's saying is, we're talking about anti-Semitism. Of course, the Inquisition he covers in at great length, and the expulsion in 1492. 500 years of Jewish life come to an end. Aside from the destructions of the temple, both temples, and the Holocaust, the worst trauma of all of Jewish history. October 7th is climbing up the charts, unfortunately. And yet, when we think of what happened after the expulsion from Spain, 1492, within 50 years, Kabbalah was flourishing. Jewish mysticism was flourishing. In Sfat, the children of, and some actual refugees of those very same refugees, reinvented Jewish life in a whole new way. Back in the land of Israel, in Turkey, in Constantinople, as well as Amsterdam, which became a beacon of freedom in a rather suppressing European culture. Amsterdam was really, really a center of Jewish life back then, where it was reinvented with a Kabbalistic bent. Kabbalistic meaning it focused on the dark side, in the sense that it focused on where is God? We can't see God in the same way they did in the Bible and in the Talmud. If God let these horrible things happen to us, to be expelled from Spain after 500 years. Christopher Columbus may have been Jewish. I'm not sure we want to claim him at this point, but let's just say that his chief navigator was Louis de Torres, and many Jews went to the New World. So when Eban is saying new worlds yet to be discovered, he then goes on to talk about America in the next episode and the Enlightenment. So as we're coming now into modern times, one of the ironies of Jewish history comes through. The very conditions from which Jews suffered become a source of strength. This dispersion becomes a commercial network. It actually started happening much earlier. The financial skills that we'd been forced to learn in the Middle Ages were now needed in capitalist Europe. So you have families, banking families, that start to emerge in Western Europe, families like the Rothschilds. But you also have throughout Jewish merchants who, as they did in the pre-modern period, understood and had relatives on both sides of the divide between the Christian world and the Muslim world. And the expression used, um, it's Western Europe actually, an item in a print newspaper called Jews the pegs and nails in a great building. I love that expression. By the way, are there any? Okay. Please feel free to put in any questions in the chat if you do. So the pegs and nails, the glue, I think that works even better. Although maybe pegs and nails, you're not harming any horses. But that's what we were in a great building, the building of civilization, the building of the world, all over the world. You needed Jews to keep the whole frame together. So there you go. They have the Enlightenment, the French Revolution, the American Revolution. Religious differences count for less. Universal visions of peace and justice, voiced by the Hebrew prophets, are taken up with a renewed spirit of enthusiasm. You think it's going to be wonderful. You think it's going to be great. But as Napoleon, especially, but also others, including in America, grant Jews a sense of equality, it's a conditional one where they have to sacrifice their Jewish identity as a national phenomenon. What's fascinating is that Jews have always been a people. We've never been just a religion, but in France they called us French of the Mosaic persuasion, as opposed to Jews. Some used expression Hebrews. I mean, even within Reform Judaism, it took upon some of that personality. In Germany in the 1800s, Heinrich Heine, one of the great literary figures, called Germany a modern Palestine, the home of philosophy, the mother soil of prophecy, and the citadel of pure spirituality. Boy, was he wrong. But he was right at the time. And he expressed the hope that many Jews felt about America as well, as receiving freedom and the ability to integrate into general society for the first time. It must have felt great, but that changed. So just to tell you how much it changed, and I'm really getting to the end of this anti-Semitism part, it brings us to the Holocaust. And of course, Mussolini really got it going with fascism. 20th century, he said, would be known as the century of fascism. Sigmund Freud said this: when books were being burned on the streets of Germany after Hitler took over, what progress we have made. In the Middle Ages, they would have burned me. Nowadays, they're content with just burning my books. But Freud was wrong, of course. The ideas in the books were to be destroyed, and all who persisted in believing those ideas, Eban says, were to be destroyed as well. So we have the evolution of anti-Semitism, from religion to economics to social. And then once the religion part was supposedly taken out, racial and political. But here's the key. Eban sort of mentions it. I'll emphasize it. It's cumulative. It wasn't that religion was taken out. Because if you have century upon century of sermons and books and beliefs and prejudices that have continued in the religious world, then it's not just about peasantry, it's about all classes. They've incorporated it. It's part of their worldview. And because of that, when you add in these other things, it just becomes more virulent. And so what we have in the Holocaust is the explosion of virulence of anti-Semitism. And then afterwards, it recedes, as it should have, as anyone with any sense of shame would. And in Germany, especially, it did. But now we see it coming back. It's like the statute of limitations did not run out. So the question that's really in front of us is, now that we have these three kinds of anti-Semitism that are mixing together, or actually sort of each in their own sphere. Of course, we have the far left, we have the far right, which are neo-Nazis and fascists, and we have Islamic anti-Semitism, which is not to be confused with all of Islam. These don't come together, but they actually do parallel one another in interesting ways. Subject for another class or discussion. But, it's hard to say things are getting better right now. And I think we all sense that. And it's hard to say where it's going right now. So let's ask where things are going. To do that, what I'm going to do is play I'm going to play the ending of the series. Unless anyone has a question they'd like to ask, please just unmute yourself and ask if you do. Okay. Or write in the chat. Okay. So I'm going to try to make this work. It's not always easy to get. Oh, thanks, Hope. Hope has a question. Could lead into a whole other class. And you're trying to tempt me to teach something else, which I wouldn't mind doing. All right. He brought up some peoples in the church blaming Jews for killing the Messiah. If someone used that as an anti-Semitic argument, how would one respond to it? You are right. That is a class that we should have, and I'd be happy to do that. There is a good book, The Bible with and Without Jesus, which we used for an adult ed class a couple of years ago. Brettler is one of the authors. Anyway, that is a great book to use as a text for that class. And I'd be happy to do it again. And it's definitely, its time has come again. So thank you for suggesting that. And while I'm here, while I'm talking about it, the first session, Barbara brought up, one of our Barbaras, that she had a book that, or wanted to know about other books like Heritage. And indeed, she was talking about Abba Eban's book, My People. I do recommend it, but there is the coffee table book about Heritage that I mentioned in that class. So I just wanted to get that out of the way too. All right, so I'm going to now play the first ending. Now remember, this series was done in 1984, 40 years ago, 41 to be exact. Exactly halfway between the Holocaust and today. So a lot has changed. If you think how much changed between 1945 and 1985, how much has changed between 1985? We don't think about it, but a lot has. And I hope you'll be able to see that in this ending, because then I'm going to give you the second ending. It was ended again when they did the DVD, and it came out in, I'm saying, 2001. So it's sort of halfway between then and now, give or take. You'll see some of the changes. Now I'm going to try to get this thing going. So if you just give me a moment. Share. All right, share sound. So just see hopefully you'll be able to hear it. And
no more war, and the opportunity to grow and to prosper, to build and to plant, to live out their lives in peace, to secure a safe future. In the north of Israel, members of a kibbutz celebrate Shavuot, a double celebration, marking the giving of the law at Mount Sinai and the harvesting of the season's first fruits. The realities of life are often painful and difficult, but a new generation of Israelis is striving to overcome the problems that have beset this small land. And in their striving, they will create, through the examples of their lives, a new expression of Jewishness. The Jews of Israel will always draw strength and inspiration from the memory of their past. They share with Jews everywhere a sense of history, a set of ideals. For a sanctified memory is what holds the Jewish people together. They remember at this Festival of Tabernacles events lost in the mists of time, the wandering through the deserts of Sinai, and the first and greatest Jewish contribution, the idea of the one God. They remember at this, the western wall of Herod's temple, all the history of their part in the ancient world and their sense of themselves as a nation. They remember the millennium of the European sojourn, the persecutions and golden times of their ongoing dispersion, and the fulfillment of the Zionist dream. Throughout their complex history, they have continued to evolve as a unique and remarkable civilization. They have borrowed from and contributed to the many cultures with which they have been in contact. In the rich variety of their lives, they reflect the variety of all civilization. The story of the Jews has an astonishing resonance. Their strange destiny, their achievements, their suffering and their vision are an enduring part of civilization, for civilization is the bringing together of the memories and the experiences of all peoples. We are, all of us, the children of history, and for the enrichment of our world, we must try, each of us, to understand our heritage, to judge it in the light of its highest values, and to pass it on as a treasure for all mankind. This is the message of the Jews to the world.
Okay, could you all hear that and see that? Just sort of nod, if you could. Good. Okay. Beautiful. I mean, you know, it really sums it up in a very positive, optimistic way. Focusing on Israel, the kibbutz experience, because the last episode really does focus on Israel. Now, I want to show you, I might not show all of it, but how it was changed when it was done a second time. I just need to set this up. Okay. So it's going to start where we were, and then we'll see where Eban takes us. Whoops.
Here on this kibbutz, in 1984, the community celebrated the harvest festival of Shavuot, a celebration dating back to antiquity. Those who built the kibbutz saw it as the foundation for the new Israel. Now their children are leaving, and the hopeful dream of kibbutz is fading. The certainties of a previous generation are giving way as a different Israel is born. Age-old assumptions of Jewish life no longer hold.
For the last 1800 years, until the last 100 years, the real issue for Judaism was how to provide powerless people with a sense of power, persecuted people with a sense of nobility, and poverty-stricken people with a sense of affluence. Now at the end of the 20th century, the question is, how do you take a people that now has freedom and has affluence and give them meaning in that context?
Freedom and acceptance have proved to be a challenge. As the Jews in the United States have become more American, the meaning of Jewish community has become more diffused.
In America, you join a synagogue for sociological reasons. you seek some sort of connection to the Jewish community. I remember people wanted to join my synagogue, not because they were interested in Hartman's philosophy, but because they wanted to meet other Jews. They wanted to drink schnapps together or have herring after services and just rub shoulders with Jews.
Americans in recent decades have watched their children drift away from the Jewish community because of intermarriage and indifference.
Freedom is a challenge to the community. Who you are has to be defined from the inside, not by building a wall and saying they're different from me, by saying here's who I am in the full dimensions interacting with the world around me. But that's a scary thing to do. We have not had to do that in many, many centuries.
May the Lord bless you both and keep you both.
Throughout the world, the core values of Jewish life continue to be reaffirmed and reintegrated. A new generation is dedicated to preserving the cultural and spiritual heritage of their people. At times, their efforts take dramatically different directions. For a few, for the Hasidim, the preservation of heritage has brought a radical separation from the surrounding culture. For most, like the members of this Chavurah group, it has meant experimenting and questioning in order to create a meaningful Jewish path within modern culture. In a dramatic break from tradition, women now often share with men the responsibilities of ritual.
Judaism always works best when it has a very wide range of responses to whatever the contemporary moment is. After all, the fundamental document, the classical statement of Judaism, which is the Talmud, is a document in which debate and disagreement is the central organizing category. And yet everyone's on the same page. People with diametrically opposed views, and it's 75% of the entire document. Its discussions end with no decision, which means that fundamentally the future is open.
In this more tolerant, more integrated world, Jews everywhere have been seeking new and diverse expressions of their Jewish identity. In the great community of America, in the populous Jewries of France, where more than 500,000 Jews live, in Great Britain with 400,000, in countries from Australia to Brazil, Jewish life and experience continue in rich and creative variety. When Herod's temple stood atop this wall of stone 2,000 years ago, the disagreement and excitement of the day foreshadowed not just exile, but also one of the most creative periods in Jewish history. Today, the long exile is over. The Jews, here in Israel and around the world, are building from their cherished memories and long-held beliefs, a new course for the Jewish people.
The story of the Jews has an astonishing...
So, hold on one second.
Destiny, their achievements, their suffering, and their vision are an enduring...
That is, then it ends the way it ended in the other one. But you could see there was this huge gap between the section where they were on the kibbutz and now where they, he's back in Jerusalem and talking about, summing up the series. I think, Hope, you mentioned that looked like B'nai Jeshurun. It was. There was a couple of scenes, I think, for B'nai Jeshurun. They had a Chavurah, they had the Hasidim, they had all kinds of expressions of American Judaism. It sort of ended not in Israel, which the first one did, but in America. And it's fascinating, that the attitude is also completely different. In the first one, there's an awful lot of optimism about, we're really just trying to help educate Jews and others to the Jewish experience because it's been so productive for the world, for civilization. The second one, it's, oh my God, American Jews are in jeopardy of disappearing because of assimilation. And that's, his message. And also Erwin Kula, who's a friend of mine from Klal, made it very clear that the blessing of freedom is also in some ways the curse of freedom. But we're in a very different place right now. And I think that's really why I wanted to show both of those, to say, they're right and they're right, but we're also right. In other words, we're not in the same place that either of those two endings were at. So, between the question, Shaul Magid, who's a current scholar, very well known in the Jewish world, on the progressive side, very much so, just wrote a column, a Substack this week, based on the visit of Peter Beinart. You may remember Peter came to Bethel with Danny Gordis when they were doing dialogues together. Now Peter is way off on the left, and he doesn't consider himself a Zionist by any means, wants one state, but a one democratic state, and is one of Israel's most well-known Jewish critics. Anyway, he defends Beinart, but what Shaul Magid is saying is that we are now in the midst of what is becoming a schism of Jewish life. That synagogues no longer, and Jewish communities no longer need to classify as Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, because, essentially those differences are superficial. What divides now the Jewish world is whether they're Zionist or pro-Israel or anti-Zionist, which the pro-Israel crowd might call anti-Israel, but really is just pro-diaspora. I don't want to, again, that should be another class. That should be a major discussion. We should talk this through. We all need to talk this through. But I do agree that a schism is happening. I think it can be reversed. I think it just takes a couple of really good elections to change things, to change the tone. But there's a lot of damage that's been done. And Jews are fighting against other Jews. We saw it in the New York mayoral race. Perhaps more than we've ever seen it before in New York City. But I shouldn't say that because there have been several major Jewish schisms in world history, in Jewish history. Magid talks about them. Going back to the rabbis and the Karaites, in the 9th century. We can go back even farther, Moses and his rebels. Anyway, the point is we are in a different place now. We'll end with that, but we're going to do something before we end with that. And that's the whole question. Sorry, Hope, let me read your comment. It's a big problem and not helping the ignorance and danger occurring now. True. And I think especially regarding Israel, that's why I thought this series was so important, because it doesn't pound you over the head with current Israeli issues, but gets back to the deepest need for a homeland for Jews. And there's no greater argument for that than the last 3,000 years, certainly the last 2,000. Okay, So, what are the great contributions of each 1,000-year period? And when I did this as a mental exercise a few years ago, I said, easy for the first 1,000, the Bible, and Eban talks about, the Bible being this culmination of Jewish creativity and historical narrative and poetry and everything from that first 1,000 years. Then you have, the next 1,000, which was punctuated by the destruction of the temple, the second temple, creation of Christianity. You can call that a great Jewish creation, but I, don't want to take credit. The Talmud and rabbinic literature. And now, when I say rabbinic literature, it didn't become standard and normative right away. You might remember, I think I showed it to you last time, Dura Europos, the synagogue in Syria that was unearthed about 50 years ago, and of course was not available for Jews to see until very recently because the Syrian government has changed. But that has depictions of human beings, depictions of God on the walls, which the rabbis never would have allowed. So it just shows that in the second, third centuries, Rabbinic Judaism wasn't the only Judaism, but it is the one that survived. And it was an amazing creation because it survived to this day in various forms. But there are many other forms of Judaism that have also taken its place. So now the third millennium, what is our greatest creation, contribution to civilization, to the Jewish world? There are a lot of geniuses like Rashi, Maimonides, but they really were based in Rabbinic Judaism in that world. They were commentators on the Talmud. But Israel has had our greatest impact. Israel has been our project. Israel has been our experiment. Israel has been the miracle that marks what in 1,000 more years people will hopefully, God willing, call the greatest, most revolutionary creation of the Jewish millennium, the third Jewish millennium. Israel is our book of Psalms. It is our magnum opus. And when, and I still say when, may not be in my life, but when there is peace with the Palestinians and security with all Israel's neighbors, then all of the great things that Israel can be will come to be. And that already has started to happen technologically with water, with irrigation, with, defense as well. But we just need to keep working on that project. And that's why it's not just about education. It's about labeling people, Zionist, anti-Zionist. That's not the point. The point is Judaism, the Jewish people, and our contribution to humankind. So that was, one of the points I wanted to make as we head to wrapping this up. Israel and America are not countries for us. They are experiments. America too. It's a 250-year-old experiment. The other one is 78 years old. Both are pretty old for democracies. In fact, very old for democracies. And yet we can't give up on either project. And Eban's ending, I think, is very important. He says, the Jews are building from their cherished memories and long-held beliefs a new course for the Jewish people. The story of the Jews has an astonishing resonance. Their strange destiny, their achievements, their suffering, and their vision are an enduring part of civilization. For civilization is the bringing together of the memories and experiences of all peoples. We are, all of us, the children of history. And the enrichment of our world, for the enrichment, we must try, each of us, to understand our heritage, to judge it in light of its highest values, and to pass it on as a treasure for all humankind. This is the message of the Jews to the world. And so I want to conclude now with something a little offbeat. I don't know if any of you watch the podcast that features one of the anchors of Israeli television, as well as a great writer from England. and I want to show you. They were in New York about a couple of weeks ago. And so the podcast is called Unholy. And they had as a guest Alex Edelman, who's one of the great Jewish comics today. He's also an actor. He's a Broadway star. But in 10 minutes, if you just give me 10 more minutes, and then we'll run a little bit over, you will hear him refute the notion that the golden age of American Jewry is over and that things are horrible. And it's a really nice way and a funny way to end this series. So I'm gonna get it going in just a second. Okay. Here we go. Hold on. All right.
Jokes about this time. I have a joke about anti-Semitism. It's not written. I was kidding. I have a joke about anti-Semitism, and
Can you hear it?
I've been doing it since
right.
I guess end of 2023. And at some point it's just a joke about how someone said to me, "It's such a tough time to be a Jew," and I was like, "Oh yeah," as opposed to all those super chill times. All those times it's amazing to be Jewish. And it sort of progresses where a relative of mine actually said to me, "It's the worst it's ever been." And I'm like, "The worst it's ever been?" The worst it's ever been. And I mentioned that my mom's side suffered an anti-Semitism, a Holocaust, and my father had a relative who was murdered by Cossacks in 1841, and I go, I want him, my cousin, to meet. And my ancestor's like, "Oh my God, a Jew in the 21st century," and my cousin's like, "It's actually pretty bad." And he's like, "Oh my God, are there still Cossacks around?" He's like, "No, it's just kind of uncomfortable to go to Columbia University some of the time." And my ancestor's like, "Oh my God, there are Jews at Columbia University?" And he's like, "Yeah, a lot of them are self-hating, especially faculty." And he's like, "Wait, there are Jews teaching at Columbia University?" And he's like, "Yeah, but a lot of them criticize the state of Israel." And my ancestor's like, "Oh my God, there's a state of Israel?" And so I've done this thing, and sure, thanks. But the funny thing is, a couple of people have reached out and been like, "My rabbi said the same thing. My rabbi has made the same point." Rabbi David Wolpe, in a couple of months later, in a clip that I didn't see until recently because Rabbi Wolpe sent it to me after he heard about this secondhand, they're making the same point. So I think people are finding comfort in humor. And the real challenge for me is, how do I do it in a way that makes sure no one else... It's not the same approach, but Rabbi, in the clip he sent me, it's almost uncanny. Rabbi Wolpe's, someone says, "What gives you hope?" And he's like, "Hope is me talking to my grandfather," and he says, "There's anti-Semitism at Harvard, and I'm experiencing anti-Semitism at Harvard," and the grandfather's like, "You're at Harvard?" Yeah. And so it's like a very similar thing. So sometimes I've found myself with overlapping material from comedians. I've never found myself with overlapping material from rabbis in Los Angeles. So that's a bit of a concern. Maybe I'm taking a bit of a turn, a little bit of a turn towards the religious, but yeah.
Is there anything you wouldn't touch? Is there anything that's too taboo you're not going to make fun of?
Nah. No, but I don't intend to offend. There's a really famous Anthony Jeselnik is a really brilliant comedian. Says that he quotes someone who maybe it's like Andy Warhol, who says art is getting away with it. And so sometimes if people are offended, that feels like a craft failure. Do you know what I mean? You haven't quite done the work to put the power lines underground far enough. Yeah. And so I would allude to anything or do a joke about anything if I thought it was making a good point or was a worthwhile punchline. And also, all the power's in the third rail. So, yeah, I mean, look, my favorite joke, I think I told this on Unholy, is the Holocaust joke.
Yeah, you should tell it.
Yeah.
It's my favorite joke. It's this guy, I can do it long, but I'll do it short in the interest of time. This guy dies and he goes to heaven and he meets God. And they're chatting, and the guy says to God, "God, would you like to hear a joke?" And God goes, "Oh, sure, I love jokes." And the guy tells God a Holocaust joke. And God says, "I got to tell you, I I don't find that joke funny at all. And the guy goes, well, I guess you had to be there, huh? And that joke, and sometimes you tell that joke, I'm not kidding, one of the first times I've ever had an audience laugh at that. But again, and not to insult anyone, only an idiot wouldn't realize that wasn't a great joke. And sometimes people are like, does comedy have to be funny? And I'm like, I don't think so, because that is a joke that isn't necessarily the funniest joke in the world, but it's clearly a great joke. Because it sums up...
It's profound.
Seinfeld says that joke is a novel. And it really is. It's like a brilliantly rendered, concise understanding of a paradox. So like, yeah, I don't know that there's anything I wouldn't touch, which is, and also like, I always thought people who talked about this were pretty shrill, but like, because I'm like, we live in the 21st century. When are comedians actually going to be censored by the government for their jokes? When is it actually going to happen? You've got to be living in crazy times to think that a government is going to weigh in on what a comedian is allowed to say. And now it's actually happened.
Yeah.
And I feel like shocked by that. But like, no jokes should be sent. Like, I watch Gutfeld all the time. It is impressively joke-free. And I'm offended by the content of it. It's one of the worst. It's abominable. And I still think he should be able to go up there and say his same 4 punchlines every single night with no one interfering with him. So like, I am really shocked to see people actually coming for comedians in 2025. It's astounding.
I'm going to be parochial in this way, which is about Jewish comedy and Jewish comedians. And there's different things. But the thing that, I mean, there's many things that set you apart from other comedians, and certainly in terms of other Jewish comedians. Well, the thing I had in mind was that you talk about the Jewish experience, and even the Jewish religion.
What does that mean? Like Tay-Sachs disease? What are you talking about? Like, what's the...
Well, I mean, most don't talk about the stuff you talk about.
Yeah, I mean, like, I talk about what it means to be Jewish, as opposed to like Jews are like this and non-Jews are like that, because I also wasn't raised. Like, whenever anyone asks me, like, people ask me sometimes, like, we talked about this.
Yes, I think people was me. I asked you if your parents wish you were a doctor or a lawyer. You mocked me for like 10 minutes after I asked you that question.
Just never got that. Like, who wants their kid to be a lawyer in 2025? You want your kid, you have a precious child, you put them through Hebrew day school, you took them to other extracurriculars, you got them through Ramaz, you did all this bullshit, and you want them to sit at a desk and look over, like, what? Like a lease for a Shell station in Pennsylvania? Like, this is what you raised your tatala for? Like, this is insane. You want your kid to be a dancer.
Yes.
Right, wow, that O from the audience is disturbing. This is the cycle of immigration. You're a grocer, so your kid can be an accountant, so their kid could be a DJ, and start it all over again. We're in the DJ stage. DJ Moishi, Uncle Moishi in the, you know.
Noted.
Did Uncle Moishi and the Mitzvah Men make it?
That was the second time you mocked me for a question.
It's not you. It's this. I hate archetypes. People always. There's some fucking book out about part of my Yiddish. There's some book about how like Jewish humor is dying. And with due respect to the author, who I'm sure spent some time in a library, this is a good thing. What Jewish humor is not dying. Shtick is dying. Catskills humor is dying because the Catskills have died. So what's the point of keeping this Tummeler humor when the Tummelers are gone? Like, Judaism has evolved as all American like faiths and ethnicity and ethnic groups have evolved. So let's have a comedy that reflects the Jews that we are now, so we're not stuck in this Jackie Mason bullshit that we've had for such a long. No disrespect. Fine, you're hissing, but like. Go see Jackie Mason if you like it so much.
So you don't agree with like Franklin Foer that the age of American Jews, the golden age, is over?
We have a new golden age. Mm-hmm. We live in a new, incredible Jewish moment. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there are challenges. Obviously, this is an embattled community. It's always been an embattled community. And obviously there are intense geopolitical conflicts that we're concerned with. There are huge existential issues. We've always had huge existential issues. There are brilliant Jewish art. Taffy Brodesser Akner is writing brilliant books. Etgar Keret is still doing really incredible stories. There are Jewish filmmakers. There are Jewish musicians. There are Jewish academics that are of a quality that is as good as we've ever had. And Franklin Foer, by the way, is a brilliant thinker. I would argue, aren't there like 4 Foer brothers, and aren't all of them accomplished in crazy ways? Isn't there like Josh, Franklin, Jonathan, and the other one? Like, isn't there?
The black sheep.
Yeah, he's a lawyer or a doctor or something like that.
Okay. I think you get the idea. So anyway, he doesn't think that that we're ending the great period of the golden age of American Judaism, and maybe he's right. I'd like to think that. So would anyone like to make any final comments or questions? I appreciate, I've been looking in the chat, and very nice to hear from you.
I would have a quick question, Rabbi, if I could.
Yes, go ahead.
Again, thank you so much.
Sure. Hi, Evan.
There's such a common thread in all of your teachings all these years, and there's almost always an optimistic tinge, no matter what's going on, and it's so appreciated. And we can tell how difficult it is now because of the reality of what's happening. Yeah. And I wonder if you could just speak to just this part of it. The United States obviously has had a long history of leadership which would tend to the right, ultra-right anti-Semitism, ultra-nationalism, etc. Are there any parallels in Israeli history where we see this Netanyahu part 2? If there can be 2 Bibis, and there's the early Bibi, and there's this Bibi in this era of ultra-nationalistic tendencies around democracies, as an Israeli democracy, to me, that's the most challenging part, maybe the reason for the schism, essentially, amongst American Jews, that we see an ultra-nationalistic tendency in Israel that we're unfamiliar with.
Yeah, interesting. So I would like to believe that there will be elections next year. I think he is wildly unpopular, and what's going to happen over the next few days will be fascinating because he's appealed, with our president's help, for a pardon, a preemptive pardon for the 3 trials that are going on. I think 3, maybe 4. There is no precedent for granting that pardon unconditionally. It is possible, sort of the Nixon model, that there might be a pardon after some kind of resignation or conviction or an agreement to stay out of politics forever, and that might be a deal worth taking. So that said, it is scary how Israel has evolved in an illiberal direction, much as America has over the last decade. And I think it's a worldwide issue. But Israel has, although it has a history of democracy for its entire time, it's always been under security threat, which causes automatically some kinds of limitations to democracy. And in addition to that, the population, is filled now with segments that are not democratic in background. Whether it's the ultra-Orthodox, that's now approaching 15+% of the population, maybe more. The Arab population is very democratic, actually. They're 20%, though, and they're not included in the Israeli democracy in a way. I mean, they can vote and all that, but they haven't been involved in the governments until recently, which I hope will happen again because they need them to make for a Knesset majority. And then you have this couple of million who came in from the former Soviet Union, whom we hoped would be a secularizing influence on the population, but because they don't have a background in democracy either, They're very skeptical about it. They're very skeptical about left wing because they hated their socialist rulers. So, you have all of these, and then the Sephardim as well, although they've grown up in Israel, many of them, they also came from countries that don't have democracy in the background. So you have all of this coming into a mix where we're trying to say, no, you have to have an independent judiciary. And they don't understand that. Many of them don't understand why. Just have a strong leader like all these other countries do. I do think that Israel's citizenry will prevail because they've been the heroes for the last couple of years already in the judicial protests when Netanyahu tried to upend the Supreme Court. And during the war, I mean, the first few days after October 7th, it was the Israeli population that saved them. While the army even, and the government was nowhere to be found. So it was the population that has risen to the occasion, and I hope they'll rise to the occasion again, and I hope they will in the next elections, to get Netanyahu out of power. And I think anyone would be better, even someone who's to the right, and that will happen. Naftali Bennett, the most obvious possibility. But center-right, some coalition that will at least be more inclusive and more, more bending toward justice.
Amen.
I hope that helps, Evan. I hope.
No, it does. Thank you. It always does. Thank you, Rabbi, for all.
But it's, we keep saying it. So many people keep saying it. It's the government that's the issue right now. It's not Israel. Israel is not a genocidal state. Some decisions are not genocidal, in my opinion, but they've been very damaging over the last couple of years, understanding that they've been facing a genocidal threat. And this country, similar, when we're just bombing boats for the fun of it, we can get into that. But we got a lot of work ahead of us, and I just hope this could help inspire us to get down to it.
Very much.
Michelle, do you have your mic open?
Hi, Rabbi.
How are you?
See you again. I'm good, thank you. Thanks. First of all, thanks for introducing us to the Abba Eban documentary. I think we're about to start number 7, so we plan to finish it.
Great.
I thought it's a great sort of review of history and kind of a survey. And it's also been interesting watching it in light of watching the Ken Burns documentary 2 weeks ago. The part about the similar time frames, just sort of to think about the turmoil that we've all been through in the past and how we've come to where we are today and the influences of the past to that we're still feeling today. I thought that was all very interesting.
If I could sort of cut in for a second.
Sure.
I love the Burns series. I love every Burns series.
Yeah, same here.
I think I think Abba Eban could have used about 10 more episodes to bring the same kind of nuance to Jewish history that Burns brought to the American Revolution. Because he tried, but it was just sort of a sketch of Jewish history with some basic themes, well articulated and beautiful scenery and nice music.
Abba Eban was trying to do thousands of years, and Ken Burns was covering 8.
Exactly. Ken Burns, I would love to see Ken Burns do the Jewish War 66 to 70 against the Romans. That would be fantastic. And he's already shown he can do stuff without photographs. So,
Yeah, interesting.
Let's write to him.
I want to comment on something you mentioned earlier this evening. You're the first I've heard to use the word schism to describe what's going on amongst diaspora Jews today.
Yeah.
Have you been hearing that to describe what's happening? Or having just spent Thanksgiving with multiple generations of my family, I think that is not too strong a word to describe what's happening.
I know it shocked me when I first heard it, but I agree. It's can you guys all still see me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know why I just lost you on my screen. All right, let me see if here we go. I got you. Here we go. Okay, so Shaul is a very creative thinker, really a great scholar. He's at Harvard, I believe now. And this week he wrote about it for the first time. So I think we're going to start reading about it a lot. I think, we're at the ground floor, but we're going to start seeing it. and we're seeing it, primarily there are a lot of very well-respected intellectuals who are saying that, it's time to give up on Zionism, and yet are very proud Jews. And Peter Beinart is one of them. He went to Tel Aviv University on an invitation last week to speak, despite the fact that he had been warned not to, and he was excoriated afterwards. The speech drew very little attention in Israel, and not, he's basically persona non grata in much of the Jewish world now. But it was the BDS crowd, the pro-Hamas, or at least pro-Palestinian crowd. I won't say Beinart is not pro-Hamas, who really got upset at him for not boycotting Israel. So we're facing, it's just so excruciating because it's Jew against Jew now. But Shaul Magid, who is supporter of Beinart pretty much, he says this is really starting to happen. And when I was up in Boston for Rosh Hashanah at my old synagogue, and I noticed that a new congregation held Rosh Hashanah services that advertised itself as a non-Zionist congregation. When you think about it, the Reform movement, the conservative movement, Orthodoxy, all forms of Orthodoxy are very pro-Israel. There's a rally tomorrow, I believe, in New York that the New York Board of Rabbis, it's at the synagogue where a couple of weeks ago, there was a protest by, pro-Palestinians of the Aliyah Nefesh B'Nefesh organization that only promotes, Jewish immigration to Israel. It's basic Judaism to encourage people to want to fulfill their destinies in the Jewish homeland. And they were protesting it as being illegitimate. And then Mamdani wrote that, or his campaign, or his office, that it was not appropriate for a synagogue to be housing that kind of program, which was unthinkable. And that just spurred a tremendous reaction among Jews who are already worried about him. And, if he were ever trying to put Jews at ease, and I wish he would, and I think he is a little, but his instincts, his gut is so anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, that he can't resist. He can't resist using the idea of genocide in the Oval Office when he wasn't even talking about that. Right. But he had to use it. Everything else was about affordability. And oh, by the way, Israel is killing children. And it's just hard to believe that this guy is going to be mayor of New York unless he really tries to reach out to Jews who are so central to the demographics of New York. Anyway, got off my sermon pulpit for the moment.
Okay. Well, if you ever want to do something where you talk about how to have reasonable conversations with friends and family around this, question of Zionism versus non-Zionism in America in terms of our
are things going on at your synagogue?
On that topic, not that I'm aware of specifically, no.
And you're in
I'm in Chevy Chase, Maryland.
Yeah, Chevy Chase. Sorry.
Yeah.
I would think if it's ever going to happen, it'll be there, because that's the most political area in the world.
Yeah.
I think it needs to happen within small communities where people feel safe to talk about it. I'd be happy to do it because, basically we all know each other, or from various circles, whether my Substack or from Bethel. But it's important for people to feel comfortable. I just felt comfortable saying what I just said. Right. This is recorded. It could go anywhere, but you got to say what you got to say.
Well, thank you. And can you also, in a follow-up email, perhaps, or on the chat, provide the link for the Alex Edelman YouTube? I'd like to look at that again. That was fun.
Yeah. Here's my concern. And I recorded this session, and YouTube may not allow me to post this, but I can send the link of that. It may not because I'm using other, other YouTube videos, but including Heritage itself. But hopefully they'll get the gist. But yes, I will do that. In fact, if I put it in the chat now, can you cut and
That
paste?
works for me. Yeah.
All right, hold on. And then I think, unless we have any other questions, we'll call it a night. Let me do this.
Just a super quick follow-up, Rabbi.
Oh, absolutely. Not even super quick.
I appreciate it. It's just so exasperating, and Beinart and others, I can't even speak sometimes after hearing him on this subject. But that and the other anti-Zionists, or this multi-generational catastrophe of the Palestinian issue, which has gone back forever, and the current political environment in Israel, specifically the leadership, other than these issues, where does their justification for their virulent anti-Zionism come from? Not that those are not small issues, but they're long-term issues. And if these issues were to somehow miraculously be addressed in the short term, maybe regarding leadership, in the longer term, God willing, would there be this anti-Zionist tendency?
I
know that maybe it's a rhetorical question.
Well, I mean, give me a specific, like, who?
Somebody like Beinart.
Would Beinart be anti-Zionist if there were a two-state solution, for instance?
I know you can't speak to that.
No,
but
I mean, I think he gave that decades of his life hoping for it, as have so many of us. If it actually came about, and I'm not saying it's impossible, because I think, unfortunately, what we're learning is that what propels diplomacy these days is greed. And if countries like Saudi Arabia are so keen on making a deal with the US, of course, now, Trump basically took the incentive off the table by giving them the planes and all that, even without making peace with Israel. But if that were to be the condition, it's possible there could be two states with a new Israeli government. It wouldn't happen right away. I mean, it would be a very long, evolving process. And I think that's because Israelis justifiably cannot see a hostile government at their borders, and anything potentially to become a hostile government, that can't happen after October 7th. It's just out of the question. And so, unfortunately, I don't think Beinart's going to be satisfied for a long time. But I do see possibility of movement with a new government, and a new government here.
Right.
Whatever happens there, because I still think the master plan is to have hotels by the ocean in Gaza, and I don't know where that's heading.
I find this, the misinformation and misuse of terms, Zionism, genocide, apartheid, etc., going on. I find it so emotionally painful right now. It's so emotionally painful, and I do hope you do think about, teaching another class on kind of how to address, because I think that's going to happen more and more. People are coming, like they did outside of Park Avenue Synagogue, spouting garbage.
Yeah, it was actually Park East. But
Park East,
I don't mean to, but if people want to look it up, you can see all the
Park
articles.
East, Mark
Schneier and his father, and the rabbis there, Mark is actually one of the great outreach rabbis of our generation. I went with him once to Prague, where we did some dialogue with Christian leadership there, and over some old anti-Semitism on the Charles Bridge, that an icon that was changed. But he's done a lot with the Muslim world too. He was part of the Abraham Accords. He was involved in that. So for them to protest there, it's just sort of ironic. But yes.
And to have a mayor who, in his ignorance, did not realize what that organization was, and responded that way.
Yeah, I'm really trying to give the benefit of the doubt. again, I'm only going to say what I feel, so you'll know I'm being honest. And I'm saying it, we can only fight one Pharaoh at a time. And for the Jewish community to be hopelessly divided over someone who, in the end, does not have a foreign policy, while we're dealing with a generational threat to our democracy coming out of the White House, in my mind, that's the focus right now. But I do have great concern about left-wing anti-Semitism too. So anyway, so I will think about doing something like what you're describing. Maybe the Christian-Jewish dialogue thing might be a good place to start, because I think there are a lot of questions there about talking about Jesus and talking about the different religions. I don't know. Please feel free to contact me offline, and we can discuss further steps. But again, I really appreciate it. As they say, please like and subscribe. Tell your friends about my Substack, and I want to keep it going. And I definitely plan. For those of you who live in Stamford, I'll be there for the Cantor's Daughter's Bat Mitzvah in January. So I'll see you all pretty soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay. Thanks
Bye.
again.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.